Okay, welcome back for the last hour of discussion, where we will broaden the conversation to anything that our speakers today have discussed, but also the very general issues of science, Buddhism, brain, and mind.
This Geshe di chapter danje ene jik nangju da tseri kana shin ene jik da lebada dewa yewe ki dewa khari shimbine ene kuni digiyos.
Also would like to invite the audience to not only continue to give questions for this session, but in particular to consider making comments about the conference you are experiencing and suggestions, because this is the second. In your suggestions, your feedback, your comments, and you use the same white cards for those too.
Tikanashi tanda jik ruling the tewa yewe ki any tewa ta nyamdu any shembachik tanda any manzuki any tanda ruling kudik chingi su ki chedula any ruling kudik chidanda maombala any yargi tonta khandi yume dindeki any samja dini yobi bina tanda shuga utupshi sugana tini yate rochis. I'm going
to start with a great question. It's very simple, that I will toss to the three people to my right. Is there a limit for the capacity of our brain to learn and store information?
It's a simple question with a complicated answer, but my answer is if there is a limit, we haven't found it yet.
Anyone else care to venture deeper into the water?
No, I mean, I think that what Eric has said is right. But on the other hand, if we were to broaden that question, which is, are there limits to what, to use the other word, the mind can grasp, and not just the brain can process. We do know certain things that are provably true, right? So there are certain things that mathematicians, for example, have found about the limits of our capacity to represent informal systems anyway. But that's a very, very technical and involved answer.
I would like to pivot the same question to Geshe and ask whether in Buddhist tradition there's understood or thought to be any limit to what the brain, the mind can do in terms of knowledge or awareness.
In Buddhism, the Nangjula Tanda Tagara, Nang Simgi da Chu Doye de la Tad Seke Yormes, Tibetan Altangis Udwa. In Buddhism, unlike physical body, the luminous cognitive nature of the mind is such that however much you get habituated with it, the more you can make progress. I mean, until you reach total enlightenment. So there is no limit. So it's not like training the body. If you train the body, then even if the world's number one person in long jump, everybody says he is the number one. But it's not possible for him to jump from one mountain to another mountain. But in the case of mental training, you keep on training. And you will never come across a person who will say, I've now learned so much that my mind cannot move forward. So that shows that the nature of the mind is such is that it can be developed to limitless state.
So we should be suspicious of someone who claims they're number one in thinking.
Ko komse jendu kunjin junde troops kunjin jama hibe tu dana songona hirako Komzin bezo charmal mudebas namjing of the love de Gua, Simji Chuni in Bechir, Seducota, Sang Maje Pardo, and Eco Yargitaman Rotuiji race, the pedal and namjing of the Chonda Chui to Hinos Lagua. What the Lula tending a China, Consabiling like Keda Yodingi, the Chumja Javela coat, Pekeda Yores Lavina, Kota and Kitango, Keda Yor Chesa, that things are reaching the reaching Chungu da Sierra within the Halam Koyomre, Sejore. The sim gitan beyond the Cocasa Yarjeta in control using that in the Tamid pay to some Jepert pay which your risks.
Okay, again, invite the Geshes to make comments or questions.
Tewa da samju kana shen is.
The Dakawan, Tenjin number Swin and do you and Diwati like Karsana. Mazuchitang the Joshiti only Shio, but the Jackie country stang in said Digona, Nijoshitula, and numbers of song take your that in Sonzang didn't tell you need to watch Shivaina. Tangazu Misichila, Nijang, Shishatam Chizoy, Mare. Karjin at the Misichila, neither Jujuzilla, Case Debia on the Tambaina, Gavin Dungila Sobia Wangi, and Nichiwa Masebala Sobia, Niti Jang to you, Mare, Sonzang Mazu. Taki Kiwatamba Kadambi Nala, Shongana Dinison Yorwa. Mazu Chini into Hishinam Dramans, Chi Sejan Chisum Shibi, Nambi Chili Umagan Bashi, Rangito Batanta Lambaja, Siagani, Don Tichi, Tajajina Yore, Tishila Jabi Tony Marang Sam Chivaina, Gang Nichisola Pembata, Rangi, Ganga Doba Yobata, Rangi Ganga Miva Yobatini, Ani Tarshimbaji, Konjitani, Jani, Jamadini, Rangini, Shiva Yadida Tandanga, Ninamba series. Nini Rangi Shiva Tini, ni Mai, Rangi da Thomas Nanda, Ni Koriki, ni Chisola Pa, ni Rochismasuna Pa, ni Chini, Yang Shiva, Mi Shentan Jena Pa, ni Shivaya Yaki the Dambatan, Dindijini, Jini, Panapitun of Shiva in a Terry Jean Nala, Garsung years, Huzo Garsegus Nagazamazo, Yamchichi Vikaba, Mazo, Takini, Neboji Baina, Kola Tapula Tenia, Pegila to Yoris. Trapon said, Chini, Nini, Tanini, Shini, Tapana Jela Soba, Nipa, Perno, the Digitani, Nisebo said that she Trapungu Pumbu, on the point of say to Giris. On Dina Sing the bit in Nansing, Mazovian, Mi Garwachik, Hivaya, Kesan Jiba, Dela Teni, and Michona Pa, and Jacitani, and Hiva Yajitan, the Tanji, Tonguyo, Dindiji, Samguyo. That Dean Susan Dordina Garson in the Shikishna. That Richie Kansanji, Panata Travaji, that Jombodanga Janji, wanted Tambaina, Jombodanga touching Bajang, Nichatonji touching Baji Marde, in Kumichida Babi, and the Umajina, Umadilla touching Bajidan, Dita, Tigana, Jashon Tampotion, Karaji, and Taradoji, Yobaji Tangla, the young Rotavaina, Richie Kansan, D20 Milada, and the Pentodova. That Mikan. Consumption in me and Yam to Sobaina, Semala, Kiva, New Mala Kiva, Parchilla Kiva, or the Deliga, Kiva, dependence on Baina, Jumbo on the touching Baji, Chisolapa, and Yakitanya, or Dendiji Tanuji and Dona, and it the Tanam Yakishi, Reta Maresia, Tubadi, and it Jiki Mevaina, Tili Shimbi Tam, and the Kiva numbers of Yanchi, Kariuna Mazula, Lamdunji, Sonosi, said to Adina, to Jena.
So his question is regarding the extension of knowledge. In Buddhism, it is quoting Shantideva. Shantideva says that life is short, there's so many things to know. We do not know the span of our life. So just like the swans extract milk from water, take what you really need and don't just go after everything. So that is one way of gaining knowledge, extending your knowledge in a deeper sense, not in a wider sense. So from that perspective, you should gain or extend your knowledge in the direction which is desirable, which is beneficial, and which is useful. So he feels that is one way of extending the knowledge. Another process of extending the knowledge is, as you have explained in the classroom, giving the example of the multiplication of the cell and the forming of the cell body. So similar like that, having specialized in particular knowledge, whatever knowledge you have gained, you share it with others. And that way you should also extend your knowledge among the people. For example, in the case of the Buddhist studies, you do the specialization in the sense, for example, not all the 5 major sciences, but let us say focus on Madhyamika. Then in terms of Madhyamika, you can not only study the Madhyamika text by the Tibetan scholars, but also by Indian scholars, also those by the Buddha. So that way you really become a competent scholar in that field of Madhyamika. So in this way, if you're able to really come out with specialized scholars in different fields, that may be perhaps much more effective in extending the knowledge in a deeper sense. So what do you think? Do you agree with me with this kind of process of extension of knowledge? If you don't agree, then what other better suggestions of extending knowledge that you have?
I think I totally agree with that statement. And in fact, I think if you can learn a subject such that you can then teach it, I think that you have the best understanding of that particular topic. And in fact, as a personal note, what I used to do as a student is after I would go to a lecture, I would actually go into an empty classroom as a student and try to teach it to an empty classroom filled with empty chairs. And I felt that if I could teach the subject matter, then I would have a better understanding of that matter. And so I think that if people took a similar attitude about learning, perhaps they would be able to extend their knowledge and incorporate that knowledge a bit more meaningfully.
Thank you, Lord. Gyanakira suya de bed mutuyus, kansana dedication bashira rehas ko desin chigle migar lobjon changje hiyon jajib chedi pecation bure ben koran cha wa ine koran geta maung bal gigin che na de samlo che yungdu ani gigin sal chi ni lobdon shugo de jeshu ani de sarveje lan jinkhang tungba chigl chi ne ani dyun li yode ben kubja tijela ani loma yin du shi she ne to la ani lobdon che yo wadan kolob nang yo be ke tu su ji thadik che ne jang yungdu ani ko jungmo sosu ki ta gigin che je le lobdon che khari na tu tol ko ne mi bada migar ge lobjon tuli chembo yungdos.
Sometimes people would give me strange looks when they saw me waving my hands in front of an empty room, but I didn't mind.
The samsam ganyo be soro kubja ke je khede do enemy khashe yung ne kemu ge khenzar de nam jur de ro do da de che ke mandos.
And the chairs passed all the exams, so it's okay.
Exit kubja do tangres.
This question was asked yesterday and now again today, so I think I want to hear this one. It's about plants and their situation in biological terms and in terms of sentience or consciousness, because it seems like in the spectrum of organisms there may be a difference between the way Buddhism and biologists consider sentience or consciousness. So does anyone have a comment, especially regarding plants?
Well, I'll take that one from a neuroscience point of view. And as the Geshus and also the leaders know, plants do not have a nervous system. And from a neuro point of view, because they don't have a nervous system, they don't process information. They take information from the outside world and they do use that information, but because they don't have the same structures as animals, they don't experience life in the same way because they don't have the machinery to do so. So from a neuroscience point of view, they don't have a nervous system, so they can't process information in the same way as an organism with a nervous system. So their experience must be different, if they have an experience at all.
Dingin tuwa dia komas ngal dichik shimba siche demba ina dadi zishin la ani na hiba yume da ani tigana chi di ani semjen da ani chewa kar yume di kolin sarwa chaza di ani zishin da semjen ning pal mandawa kar yore slabe mana jirda ani zishin gunzo ani kotsu tseso yowa chikba chadu yore chaza di ndu zambala ani konzo la chikchi kuryu ki ani yalen gunzo ani pa kuryu ki nezu dinzo dale tanjin dinzo pa yalente tobya ki nuba yores yimbe na ani nuba nizu khar yungwa de la yalente to ba zama to ani ji de la ani ji ngazu simje nang shin ani ji ga churwa de du tang nyum de nyong yang ki ani konzo la ki wangbo de yomare sa chuje so de yomare se za khadila du zamba la ani konzo la ani wangze ki mala se de yomare se ge.
From Buddhist viewpoint, we do not believe plants have consciousness. But at the same time, in number of sutras, it is mentioned plant like animals, flower like animals. They are sentient beings which really looks like a flower. It's not flower, but a sentient being. And there are sentient beings which looks like a plant, but not the ordinary plant, it's a sentient being. So in the case of those, since they are sentient being, they have consciousness.
Just to add, I mean, there's recent work and more so which suggests that plants certainly process information. Right? I mean, that's well known. Now the question is, and this is a very deep question, as to what constitutes the essence of mind from a science perspective. And if it turns out that it's information that is the essential characteristic of mind, and you can show that plants process information that's as complex as what animals do, then you would have to conclude that plants have minds as well, right? So, but these are, we are now at the very cutting edge of what we can even speculate about, let alone prove. But I think that it's not outlandish to imagine that the information complexity of what plants do is comparable to certain animal species, anyway.
Chizan tadangi labde di nangzhu thawna chayna chidang chigda hing duzuli chig semyoba chigma res. Hina yang dog nanglo la medo dawi semjen dang hingdung dawi semjen siga dinde yore. Duzu yang hopsite na medo raw hingdung raw tongi yore di duzu semjen res. Semjen inzang ko semyo res. Da len dinde raji hiwi rwa. Dinde na Khurang sungye di nang la 제자 심제 인데 민세의 치료 내수 용괴가라 내수 쿠두 지에디게 당진 지에 예시 지에디게 심제 낭신 지에도도나 애니 지행도제 심데레 심제에서 라고식 메도스
Okay, Eric.
I might argue that complexity and of information processing may not be an adequate measure of consciousness. For example, if you look at the internet, for example, which has billions and billions and billions of communications and bits and bytes of information, is the internet conscious? That's a question. I don't have an answer. But it may be argued that it is not, and just because we have so many calculations, so many mathematical calculations, doesn't make something conscious.
gakpa jawre resha sabzab chenamado jesa di gakpa jab chawa chix karsiro sena di chige nesu mangbo chig kudu che tu nyarza thuba chigbu ge sem yoba jiba ina any internet duso sem yoba chigu sem yos and duso na le bits down bytes down cheje kanje angzi ge thone da nesu mangbo shibu chi nyar tu duas jesa di samji gi sheba yoba che khapure se da gen la ge disugudo your response.
Very quick one, otherwise this will go back and forth. I think that's an invalid comparison. The reason being that the internet is artificial, right? It's a human-created entity. Now, you could argue that natural entities which are informationally as complex are in a different status than artificial ones. So in the same way, like if you're doing physics, if you notice that both electricity and magnetism obey the same principles, you think that they have the same underlying laws, that they are the same phenomenon. But if I simulate electricity on a computer, I don't say that therefore it's the same as magnetism, right? So there's something about natural entities that I think might be different.
The European Union might disagree with you, who has just invested billions of dollars to create an artificial brain based on mechanical circuitry.
I think it's wasted money.
He just said that he thinks that it's a waste of money. So,
Okay, any Gilakuna class level mina any paid digimidus to the Tanda internet pipesha digimidus. Mandigo Kimzen Harris Lavi mina internet nzo any domi any trajet nzo miki suesha wiki any tuji shagures. Chesa Tanda Niki Shidu Sambala. Negi any fishing sea did any chickney, Simjanki, any party needs to the Devasha, no summer, any Rangjung Kuyu, Nang Rangshin, any Chung the Gochagures, Chung Deva Nashi, and this was any Tumo Maibiki, any Cheju Tony, any Nuba Yazachia, the Nuba process letters of Mountain and Yogur Sita, Yogur Chiaki, any Nuba Yogi, the Neji Tony, any same sea, you. Chowa shaya ke dingi shenyin lasro ane digena dinde imena ane thanda European tan tunzo yero kunzu ki ane kiran la ta ngabo ge res kai mar kunzu ki thanda ane jik Europe ki gomo ane tenbu mangu peje kosong tangje thanda ane ta leba tuji ki leba zuma jik ta soya ki bezon chedi yores ta ta ane dil ta sheba yong krewa chedi yoro ta dil zaman korang la na pesha thola relos.
So this one I'm going to direct to Geshe, but then when he explains what the term means, then I will ask the scientist. We Buddhists believe in Bardo, intermediate life. How about scientists? Do you believe in Bardo?
Yeah. Yeah.
So what is for we who don't know what intermediate life is? What is it?
Intermediary life is after the death and before you take next life, you are hanging out for 49 days in between, maximum 49 days. It could be shorter. So that state is called intermediary state.
I'd like to say something at this point. There's this very interesting thought experiment someone once mentioned, and I want to know the reaction of Buddhist scholars on this, is that if you've got the same person, leaving a body, hanging out for 49 days and then entering another body, right? And you have bodies multiplying, you have the population going up like anything. Where are all these extra spirits coming from, extra atmas coming from? Because if you need someone to die for the atma to go into another person, now if you have many more people, you need some extra atmas, in a way of reasoning. So,
that some look at around 20 years. That part of the chin and those Kevali, that didn't is a Mamuji here, that can't dilate and Zambuling the member she would pay to us. She did member the Mamu pay on that the immediate now you get some low scenario, Dow scenario, the server laying was, the server canile gures. So here it is important to think about the multiverse. It's not just one single universe where you keep on turning it's not just recycling, in the same place. It can be, from different universes. So sometimes the population can goes down, sometimes the population can increase.
It's very useful because you have all these extra universes for the things that you lose and so on.
Exactly.
The lost and found universe.
Yeta the language with the digame conscious is the Samsu Chilaphere. And Chanaso Namjune Jigde Mango Security to us, that drink the Sukium Gores. Jigde Chigra, Chignalola, the recycle sort of shed in the K Hitara in the Digomare, Link Hemban and Ramadan, Chesnut indigenous, some member Mon Yung to do it, some member Mount to do it. Then the main rose, that gala Chisway and so on.
Dortiji Shishroa. Tangazo Zambulinga me draw Mambochi Chagadu said, and it indicated that draw the Namto the young chocolate. And the Kawani young Barisina, Kawasina, Nazoga don't comes and make comes here, comes and shake your. ngazu mi la ni khazu ji gu se ge ni thani li chen ji gu sem chen se jurwa ani tonda sipa chi la ko yore ji gu se ge gu ti la tau ka shu gu se ti ti yore ti ti bi ka la kar chi ni ji gu se ge yore la na ani dongkham ni zingkham la si phi chi zingkham ni zingme la phi ani zingme ni yang ma chu dongkham yang zingkham odini chi ni kora da mi chi na ta chi jiwa sum ro sum sum gu len ba yin song zang ani ji gu se ge thani din ri jar ge yore tin song zang ngazu nang ba sang ji bi shong li na la ani sen je ani karso리 장매바당 직된 장매바 감순지 크로딩에 어딘디게 니디네 니 양니 양도 크로와 암로 이차니 로아세도 어딘디 세대게요 된성장 가줄라 안데 렌디 뺄리라고 안디니 지게니 자투비 요레스
He says there is a very simple answer. And the simple answer is he's explaining this point by using the Tibetan word called kigu. And that means you take birth several times, not just in the same realm, but we talk about three realms: the form realm, the desire realm, and the formless realm. So the transmigration could be among these different realms. So, and then we of course talk about multiverse. So there is no problem with this. Yeah.
And from a scientific point of view, we're limited by the tools that we have right now. And similar to what Geshe Lhakdor mentioned about different levels of consciousness, I would suggest that current neuroscience only has the tools now to measure that gross level of consciousness, and we don't have the tools to measure other levels. And so it's not that science says yes or no, science says we don't know. And until we have the tools to measure these things, we really can't weigh in on it.
But Tandechala Sering when he have ina Tanji the Shebala Rakwa the Tamo the Hindu Towers Sheba Nashing Tindegi Sheba Ship Sawahe in the Kunzuke Yomare, Lhakdor the Sheba Tamurik Duzurigla cause Chenje Tuje Kora Yomares. Teach you the Tandechala Tango Shevena Serigi, Tangazuke Hingmes Lave Tirares. This
one is also very simple, but very good question. Where does our mind get free will in this causal world?
I'm starting to dislike simple questions.
Maybe there isn't any free will. There's that possibility. There are, I think, several. I mean, this is, of course, a very deep question, and it's impossible to do justice to it. But there are several answers that at least people have tried to give to reconcile free will and determinism, right? One answer which seems plausible from a physics perspective is that while the world might be causally determined, because and as we know from physics, the very small differences in the causal factors can lead to very large differences in outcomes, right? And so therefore, one possibility that scientists have speculated on is that free will is not really free, but it appears to be so, and it's because of these small differences in the causal factors that lead to large differences in outcomes, you can think of it as free, but actually it's not. But I don't believe that. I think that a better answer really is that there are certain parts of the world where we are best, we should best think of it as causal modeling, and in other parts of the world we should model it as free choice by autonomous agents, and our sciences simply are not good enough to come up with a unified answer.
Tani tiwadi gyuya temba je sare tiwadi khares labi mena ani tanda ani junreki ani namsha geja shin yu zambala ani gyuda tenchi ani tiwu yungya geja shebi gyuro chezan din zamba din nanglo la ani khangsa ger susu ki ani ta khare che ma je ani rawa kitse di quality your free will and rawa yo the mess di and rawa your wes karchiji rebe yam susu karchi de doba your be yamena sama ani ta nyama leji ki en ta tangzi wal your wes di tiwa redo chada din sambala gila kurang da jazan sawe chan dela ani len dir se chi ni share yo mare simbe na ani chi tseng ri nang lo la ta yi sibe ke ani len de mangbu yu di yores di nang lo ni ji kharshi gi yores la bimbe na ani chi ta ngobu thamu ki ne kap la le yung du zambala ani tenju sangma ani chi ge juje khaya yamana chi ge yunde rodan di ani tege mewa su rawang ki toni ani ne dang de yungu yobi bene ani denzu sangma dende ki ani chamu denzu su ruru su je ani ragbe ki ne gabla le yungu zambala ani hini ani chige jodan dewu ki ani rodan di ani ngoy ya chige deshi jagi yores chirdan ani deshi jagdan di ani nga kelen chi mes ta yashu de khares la bimbina ko ngazu ki ene jigden nanglol yube ki ene ne chu khashin deshe gyabe kapsula ane chig ta le yumde sig yonere ane chig judan dibu rodang thone ane dilatene de chungore se chig deshe gya goya chig yungu yore ya ne chu khashe di ane chig ta free will sidu sambala ane chig tende ane ngeme ki ane juji ki che mare che chig deshe gya mo ba thanda ane susu khar chiji doba yube ki ane ta rangwa ji ki wone ane chungre se yungu yore se
Let me give the Buddhist perspective. I mean, it's very much dependent upon what do you mean by free will. As Rajesh has correctly said, if you're talking about complete free, then it is not possible. But apart from that, yes, in Buddhism, we do believe in free will, even though we believe in the law of causality. And therefore, it is extremely important to understand that the word karma has no fatalistic idea. Karma basically means action, which means an action that in which you are the doer. So the action does not necessarily refer to actions that has been done only in the past, but it could be action that you are doing now. It could be an action that you are going to do tomorrow. So therefore, in that sense, you are maker of your own destiny. So therefore, we do believe in free will and do not believe that we are completely doomed or determined. Nangshu ngene chewa ina tanda tasuzul rawa yo mayo sedi ta ko tiba didire gyujin le tene dusun do de ji da khor de ji na ne gir suzul rawa sin de khande yores nubsho ba nanglo la determinism se ne be de tha che sa re susu she khe yo mar sing ta du chik da ene mare sangma kharchi ne che yore sing ki ta du chik free will sing ta du ni yor da din indi ke je khe chida da free will sing chik di rawa si susul rawa yo mayo di tanda khawa jugme di ra legar bas ina chida na chu ngone cheba ina susul rawa yores nangju Lhakdor di khen go je nangju na le se du ene sangma trubsa ne susu khujo chune ta me ba tinde chik la sabani ne ko mares le se du kon che seven debe le yore tanda che him le yore mongba te chi dibu dubiye ki le yore tinde chi du mangbo chik ta susu gi che indu ene di che meje di susul rawa yo dinge chi tinde chik res.
Let's have a questions here.
Yeah, nge dewa de kyon Rajesh ga no teni siring kyon de sori teni da siring be lo jara tu mi ren la ta che do gore nga su ta ji him ju che sa de gonza sumba che le me teni shiba sari che de ke ma long we to ne ta ti kam chang de le de ore teni da da teni ji bi yun chen de ne gu ba da jun ta di 편유 동 정관리요. 되네 제동 아주 수익이 여자들 가르쳐도 요새나 수수 해봐도 자지 관리지 동고 레시피 내가들 기대도 다다디 내가 감상되라 용자 따지 힘주 제와도 되네 수수기 홍시봐도 자지 동비 탐랑라 해봐서리지데 개 로나 마음바 관리 차그래서 가시 따지 힘주 제시 내라 마롱이나 마음바 관리 차그래서 어디 걸더니 관리지 해야인스.
So, my question is primarily to Rajesh, and if others presenters want to respond, then it's okay. We have been talking for the last 2 days that in science we have traditionally relied on a third-person perspective, and we try to avoid including the first-person perspective, and so the idea of the consciousness part. So, and now we also talked about we are reaching at a certain limit in the scientific method. So in the future, if we are able to include this first person or the subjective inquiry into the scientific method of investigation, what kind of results or the benefits it will going to bring forward in terms of the development of science or knowledge?
That's a big question. I also think I would like my fellow scientists to address it. Gael has also talked about third-person inquiry. I think that the restriction of science to measurable third-person inquiry is a particular historical choice. There's no inevitability to it, right? And already if you go outside what we might call the natural sciences to the social sciences, it's routine to include first-person choice. So economics, for example, or so let's take political science, right? Political science tries to study who is going to win in an election, let's say. But an election outcome is entirely based on subjective first-person choices. And yet we have good predictive models for how that will turn out. So I think that there is nothing in principle stopping that from happening. But I think there's a deeper issue of if we want to really understand consciousness, which is more than just voting choices and things like that, we will need much, much better ways of getting to people's first-person choices. Now, that kind of technology is coming, and Eric and others will be talking about that. So I think it'll be fantastic in the next couple of decades.
제가 아니 디워드 가고 두스 제가 아니 세리기 나로라 아니 단다 강사 순배기 딱답디 마토 아니 배주 맞이 고야디 겸전 신요 말스 코디 로규 나로라 당분 고든지 진 수배기 겸전 때니 단다 아니 딘데 로디에 차디 요레스 제가 디마도 신배기 아니 다 겸전 스키요 말스 모요니 줄라 직 단다 만주기 아니 지금 Rangjung Senrik Shedia da Tiganashi, Dele Enema Chilo Gage, Energy Chizok Senrik Nanglola, Chimbimbina, and Chapsik Senrik in Benere, Penjur Senrik in Benere, Denzuk Nanglola, Concept Tangbuk, Taktab D, any Pejuchi Yores, Chazan Pecha Shabimbina, any Nanzuchika, Vudu Chigiowas, Vudu Chibi Capsula, any Vudu Chingi Diki. Chingi Mimang Tsuki, any Vumi Sula, any Visholu Malu Siadi, Umi Chingi Tsuki, any Susuki, any Kansa Susu, Gerik Tajo, any Chadi Yores, Yimina, Vudu Majivi, any Mitsuki, and Vudu Chevi Gela, any Miko Top Cisares, Yaki, anything, Soba Chip to Yore, Soba de Kalakansam, any Tiwa Chagores, Chazadilla Duzambala, any Dik Nanglola, any Kansa Tanguki, any Nua Shache, any Lagache Diadi, Ko Lhakdor Tula, Yung Yores. Tiganashi, any Tatandig, Chala, any Kansa Tanguki, any Takta Yamena, any Kansa Tanguki, any Nua Denzo, any Shendo Chetanki, any Tablam in Benere, Tiganashi, Tuji in Benedenzo, any Yarge do Yore Yarge, Dudu Sambala, any Nizu Shendo, Yar Yungri Chesa, and Mombala, and Dik Tola Yarge Yungri Samgudus.
So the third-person perspective has a long history of using of methods, control groups, placebos, randomized control groups, a whole set of statistical methods to measure results. And so I think a similar procedural method such that investigators in different places can use the same techniques and procedures will certainly help a first person's perspective. But those methods are yet to be developed. So I think that's what's lacking, is the methods and consistent, reliable methods to investigate a first person perspective.
강사 순백이 아니 딱답 베이크 나올라 아니 지게 장도 거야다 아니 지게 제바체기 아니 타블럼 망고 주용도 요레스 제가 단다 아니 딘데기 아니 제니 그다지 나올라 강사 당부기 아니 딱지 제답디 가시니 야레 두요 마레스 라빈베나 아니 강사 당부기 뇽와 아니 천지 제베기 아니 다 타블럼 제답직 아니 야고치니요 마레스 제답디 아니 모토비 김생테니
This is a question for Geshe and then a related question for the scientists. If the spirit enters into us soon after the formation of the zygote, then does the soul or spirit also divide when a monozygote divides to form identical forms?
The spirit sigdo inju namhi sigyo sare. Namhi thokma chagza joroba pame kuran tusaj. Tina namhi chawaina da dine zygote sedi kopar mang rudu. Entana he namhi goshe jamne mang rudu yorves. Udiresha.
Zygote jik ani tanda tumbuchaji ani bu sema charuda chande sema. Chida disha du zambala ani sheba goshe tigirves.
Chema chawdu. Chema chawdu se goro. So basically it's not so much about dividing the mind or consciousness. It is really the mind entering into two different places. It's not just one mind getting divided.
단ang 저기 파마들 기회가 당하러 저기 레도 아니 저와도 몸보질로 뛰고요. 뒤가서 베라 빼나 알아서 받을은 저기 가서 아니 도메레스. 도메 인전에 두스니 주니는데 다 마도 아니 레도 아니 주가 몸보질 주는데 마이 나이니 가서 안 두스니 토르레스. 토세디고는 두스치네 다 알아서 버도 봐도 몸보 쉬우지 여러 받다 참 대대 이전에 다 두스치네 뒤가서 레여 봐이나 그러서 니자 두스 냠던 줄레 냠도 두스 차한디고는 다 목이 아니 공부들 가가니 차한 두스니 기.
And this is slightly different explanation. Because when we talk about the intermediate state beings, it's not just one. It's so many intermediate state beings looking for a home. Okay? So two of these intermediate beings who have the same karmic potential and same karmic connection with the future parents, they might together come and enter into the zygote and then get separated with separate consciousness.
당가 마무리 차서 연구한데 그저 저한테 라금 도와 근데 되게 전부 인송도 또 신나 삼성 그래서 나도 남시 지디 남신이 차요 말이야 알아 지당 나도 재미송네 남신 멤버 남시 년년면 비치 연주세 줄와 그래서 남시 많이 받지 남시 뭐지라요 말이야 생진 많이 받지 띵이라서 봐 생진 줄아요 말이야 근데 코란데니 다 지금 갈수 남비 아니 좀 돈지 줄에 고타트 줄에 대인송다 남시면비나 남시 멤버지 남기 응어지라요 매와 인송자 단다가 치만이 따버지나 남시 시디 고세자니 아주 빨리 나신지 제가 지니 근데 고세자 비자 말이야 코란 그 리기 양침 조비 갑라 아니 바 남시 니그 양침 저비 땡지 치만이 아니 코 대원 다 등세지 니 kilengyorwa 덴디가 니 리기 넘버 멤버 3지 무쳐바 인송자 아니 마치기라 또니 디님도 차비 리디 사비 디오티라 되니 아니 양침 저니 지기 여러마도 남시 시기디 고세자니 아니 지와레 남양세기 말이야.
So there is more or less similar answer, which is to say that it is not just one mind which gets divided into two, but it is basically the mother who is going to give that birth has accumulated certain karmic connection, because of which two spirits are able to enter at the same time, and then that produces the twin. Yeah.
Okay, so here are two questions that I will combine for the scientists. And it's sometimes we learn about a phenomena by exploring the extremes or the endpoints. So the questions are, when does consciousness start? Is it during fertilization of egg and sperm? And how do we understand that? And what can we learn from near-death experiences where the mind and the brain seem to potentially separate?
For the first question, when does consciousness start? This is one that I'll simply say, I don't know. I don't think that science has the tools again to measure where it starts. So I have no problem saying I don't know. As for the second question, near-death experiences, it's a controversial topic. Some people will say that a near-death experience causes perhaps anoxia, lack of oxygen to the brain, which causes neurons to fire in abnormal fashion, which then gives rise to some almost dreamlike state or some experience that is then remembered. Other people will say it's a more spiritual experience. And so I don't think that we have an answer what happens during a near-death experience. It could just be a simple response of the brain to lack of oxygen, or maybe there's something more. So this one too, I don't think that there's a definitive answer.
Can you extend that to not just near-death experiences, but certain fairly well-documented cases where electrical activity seems to have ceased for a while, you know, deeply cold people, etc., who eventually come back?
Yeah, I think it's the same thing. Perhaps, you know, the body goes through a certain state, perhaps, again, lack of oxygen, lack of nutrients, so that it causes neurons to act in a certain unusual or different fashion. That would be the reductionist point of view. If there's something more, I'm not exactly sure what that might be.
Tiwani dus, ne tiwa tangbu de kares la bina, ani manzu ki nanglo la ani sheba thomang gozu ya de kadun gozu yores, chik ta miji salong gyurim kitula, ani chik kam karmani thomar dewe ki nekaps la yungu yorwe, yamena ani di ki ani chik je ki tuzu chiraba chik la chungu yorwes. Siya ki tiwa dila ani gelang korangi ani shingi mes nga shingi me laya la ganges ke mindus chaza ani thande ki nekab la ani dinde ki nezu de ini shendo chewe ki nganzo la ani tabda yochi yo mares tiwa niyo de khardus la bimena thanda ani near death experience like do konzo kin ta delo so ro dinde ani me khashi ani chik dabyon da ani naza dinde ki kembe ani chik dus chine shibe so ra che imbena ani ko ta shiro che che ani mashiu chi so rang je lo yon delo so ro che du sambala ani di ka dida ani deve ki nezu kol ani shiro chi shu shedo cheza ani cheza antan delo dinde ki near death experience yan delo so ro dunzo yongu yores dunzo yongwe kapsla ani nganzo chowal kharji grisla mena medzo ani chik nilam tang ge beson ro lanji ge beson ro denji ge beson ro ani chik na wung nang la sa du yo so nyala lewe ko so ro dinde ki chorwa ji yores ina ta di kharjini ji ge yores du zambala ani sibe ki ani le khashi yores cheza le sibe ki len chik khares la bimena ani chik nedan khashi ko la nganzo lebala ani solung de tangi simba ani mara du zambala ani lebe ki nanglo yebe ki chabung du ani lega thukche ani lo club du ta khanggi monju khorim mebe tangwe ki gyomsel tene ani dinde ji gi yores ya chi yung yores khashi ki ani chik la da kunjo da dinde jebe ki ani nawa jebe ki gyomsel tene ta di chik chojo ki nyamne da dewa yuwa yamena ngos dinde da kunjo da dinde da dewa yuwe ki ani deshi jaban chi chi yores ता खंडर मंदा दी खर्चा दी योरस लाबे बेना अनि चिक लेबे की यामेना चिक ता लेजे की लेगा चिता चिक तोने अनि yung dia chi yores cheza ani dia an thanda deshi cha samwa ji nganzu shingi me sungsro cheza dije la gelang khorang kharshung sla mena ya mi khashi ani chik chagri the che ane yang bede sukbu choze de mau shiwu cha che yang temba thodo ya da dinde kapsla ane temba thola mantur ki ane negap dinzul yang dinde ki nizuri dinde nyongwa chi do lol da mara sharu ya cheza ane dinzu da chikba res la swa cheza dile zuma gelang kona ki dinzu thangma chapge re sun cheza nganzu sukbu nanglo la yuringbu ane seju mandang mara wa che che lhaya da solung mandang wa che che ane mara wa che che lhaya dinde kapsla ane dinde ki ta nangwa da mara sharia di yungu yores.
And just one more thing. Regardless of the mechanism involved with a near-death experience, people that come out of such an experience are profoundly changed. And that's so, whatever the mechanism is, it is not to negate their experience at all, because it is a profound experience onto themselves. What is the underlying neurological mechanism? We don't know. But their feelings after such an event are true. And so that doesn't negate any of their feelings.
Chezata dindeki any dialogue sogi kapski any nyongwa dinzo any wanzi tabungi lega chedang thone any deshi khandes ya gumin di ngazo shingi mewe yimbina any khonsu gi ngoz khari nyongu yowa di any ngoyo ni chati yores cheza di any ngazo kita chika ke malema dinde chetu mares dewana shi any ni manguji khari nyongu yores labina and dindeki any tanda kenge chungche any jelo su ta mashi che ngazo junde na shi la de midin zu gi an samlo tang da shi ju toli any gwa chimbu any do de dinde ngazo gi tongu yores.
Let me.
Yeah, go ahead.
So for the first question about consciousness, I mean, let me at least offer the possibility that perhaps asking the question, when does it start, is not the most illuminating question. To give you an analogy, suppose you were to ask, when does, and this is in Chris's world, when does condensing gas become a star? I don't know if there's a good answer to that question, but it turns out that a better question is, what makes a star into a star? And it turns out it's fusion that converts hydrogen into helium. That's the best sort of mechanism through which stars generate the energy that they do. So it may turn out, therefore, that to answer what is consciousness, asking the question when it starts may not be the best way to get to what makes consciousness.
제가 대화 당부시는데 시바 가두 아니 고주 그랬어요. 제가 아니 디 대화 듣다 아니 가두 고주 그랬어요. 디 아니 대화 약고시 잘 요래 삼기 민두스 pecha shabimena di again Chris Korangi tanda ane lobse kana lo thiwa di kuya yore pecha shabimena ane phanang lo yebe ke tedu tingba den su ruru chache ane kama khadu thubu yore se ya thiwa di kubimena ane thiwa di yakos chagu yo mares yimbena ane tedu den so soje ane negap jigla ane ta kharse da tenshu so soje ane sobe ke ane gyumzen le dene dik nang lo da jig hydrogen ki ane du den so helium ki ngol ngyo do ya da dene jig gyumzen le dene ane jan mawe to ya ki ane sakami thupna de so ane deshi gyamna ane ya cha yores cheza dile du sabala ane jig khadu ane sheba go tu re se ya ki ane keja dile ane sheba se ya dik ane ko nedan khare dik cheju khar kar yores se ya ki tiwach dine keja shibe mena ane ya yore du sus.
I'm going to finish with this one. Since all life comes from the same genetic source, the same genetic code in both plants and animals, which genes or what part of the genetic code is responsible for determining the characteristic of being sentient?
So I don't want to just answer that question. I think all these questions, whether plants are conscious, when consciousness starts, I just want to offer one possibility that we still don't know what a single cell is about. And not to say that that's enough reason to think that consciousness starts at the single cell level, but just to have the humility to understand that there's a lot going on in a single cell that we don't know. So to take one example, if you think about DNA, right, it's already in a lot of ways it's already a proto-language. There are symbols there that are not really tied to. So for example, you have the codon where you have 3 nucleotides that cause, a lot of people would say, it causes a particular protein sequence. But there's also evidence to show it's completely conventional, that it could have been any other 3 nucleotides that caused the same protein sequence. So who decided which one to do? So there is this activity that you would call semiotic, that you would call conventional and you would call symbolic. And I think all of them have the same in common, right? Zygotes, plants, animals. So.
Tamuyena Tiwadi, any Tanda Gurmus, Tiwadi Karis, Lavimena, and the Vegeta Jimmy, Serik Nangola, and so you Chinji, Dilla Duzambala, and Zishin, the Simje, and Ninga, and a Tomer, and a Rizik Chungunjing, any Chung Yores, Yores. Kisi di imbi imbena, any Riziki, any Cha Kankis, Roa, and Jikta, Simjin imbi, Cheju di, doing Taku Chigures, any Tiwa di Resharoa, Chazada di, land the Korangi Karkas Lavimbena. Any Ta Zishin la so yo re Maresia, the Tigana Shinchika, and Kam Karmal Kindugondi, Nanola, any Sheba Kadun Zugre, Maresia, the Dusama, any Tivik Rig, Dahuda Chayungudus. Cheza ani nganzo ta ni tiwe rik dinzu kabla le yungdu zambala pecha shana nganzo tabung chik yimbi na ani tabung chik ki ani khare che tu gyo me da tabung chik che ju khari me ama ja sangwa chik nganzo ki shingu yo ma res ko tabung chik ki ani ne kabla le yungdu zambala yimbi na dinala ne zu mangbo chi ani yung dig yo res cheza da dila du zambala dinzu ani ta chik ani di chen de la teni ani de chungu yore ne kap de la de chungu yore she tu mare special sha bim bena nganzu rigzek nanglo namju keja she yu sambala rigzek nanglo ne ani nganzu ke lu ta lungkam ki ani chiju khanda ro chik ani tangzi chinge ki ani sangsik se joro cha sangsik kodon sik do konzo ki ani kodon chira ba di ki ani di de la teni ani jiu de chungu re special sha na trigger ki rig di su re se ya dinde keja shi res de la du sambala tanda kod sangsik chi ki ani trigger rig chira ba chik sugu yo ba thongwa chan ki ani jaja jata ba sangsik di ki ani trigger de so chabu yor ba so chabu yo ma res chikchina ani rigzek di mangbo shiwo yobe gemzen tene ani di mai be ani kodun chikpa chikya sangsik chikpa chikya sangsik shemba chike ani trigger chikpa chikya thega ran su yo si gres cheta dil du sambala ya ani trigger ti songi ni yo ne yo di yo de ni mena kerang ke ching thome gemzen tene chik dil ran zu ya tru tene chadu yo res lasta ta dil du sambala cha samaj he tu mare stinzu rig dinzo